Uh, so Kara already introduced us, which is great. So I don't think we have a whole lot to say about us, anything additional. I do want to mention that, of course, as Terps, this is a picture of, this has nothing to do with renovations, except for this is a picture from when I went to Rome in 2000 with School of Architecture. Uh, that's me standing behind the woman in the red shirt, and this trip really sort of formed so much of my life and my experience on how I see architecture and how I understand architecture. And in that way, is important to sort of understand the broader context of who I am as an architect. Um, so we will jump right in. Um, when Max and I were putting this together, we really felt like there are some key questions to ask when you're at the beginning of a renovation project. And those key questions really are, why do you want to renovate, and what do you want, and what do you need? These questions are important for you to, the answers will be fluid and they may change over time. And as you work with an architect and a builder, you will discover and you will learn more about those answers. But it's really good to walk into the situation with having a sense of what the answers to these questions are. So the bigger, the broader question, why do you want to renovate? I need more space. We're having new family members. Maybe it's a baby, maybe it's a grandparent or a parent who's moving in with you. You want to increase your property value, which could mean that it's just spaces that need to be updated, or it could be better use of existing space. A lot of times spaces are not really well thought out in houses, and they could be much more efficient without expanding the volume. It could be that there's damage from a fire or flood, mold issue. And we added this one recently, pandemic, because the pandemic has changed so much of how people experience their spaces at home. We see a lot of people who need home offices, whose kids are driving them nuts. So it really could be anything, but really, and this is just a finite list, but really think beyond that. What's the big reason that you want to renovate? And then what do you want and need, which is really the nuts and bolts. I need a bigger kitchen, or an ensuite primary bathroom, or an office that's not near my kids, a family room, a guest suite. It could be anything, but this is really the program, right? You really want to think about what you need. Architects and builders can help you determine these things, but it's really good if you start thinking about this before you reach out to anyone. Inspiration. So, in today's age, there's lots of ways to get inspiration for the types of things that you like. Most everyone knows about Instagram right now, which is a really nice way, especially you can search through hashtags for different things you like. Pinterest, Houzz, and of course, HGTV. The one caveat with HGTV is a lot of clients will come back and say, hey, I want to renovate my house for $5,000 and want it to take 2 weeks. Having said that, it is a good way that people have been able to get engaged with the design world, and they can start to look at, how is that pantry organized? Is it a deep rich color? Is it a light bright color? How does the lighting work with the historic details in the room? What is the palette? Outdoor spaces, is there a lot of glass? Are they more traditional or more modern windows? Is there exterior space like porches and decks that can be part of the project? What's the lighting like? How open is the kitchen? These are all, and inspiration is even broader than this, but it's really a great way to start to look at pictures of things you like. Like that becomes really important, especially as you're working through the design. Once again, this is a foundation that will help you choose, certainly the right design team, but will also help your design team to design the house that's right for you. One thing I say to clients all the time is, I can design a great house for me. I can do it over and over again, but that's not my job. My job is to design a house for you. So the more input and the more feedback you give us, the easier it will be for us to develop something that's really unique to you. This is the most riveting slide, understanding your renovation budget. This is something that no one really likes talking about, budgeting stuff, but it is important. It's an important part of the process. because there's more to the renovation cost than just the construction cost. The construction cost is one component of that. But most projects will typically have architectural or engineering fees. So these are fees that you pay to an architect or design build or structural or civil engineer. Um, most designers and most engineers can ballpark their fees based on the construction cost. So, for large, moderate to large projects, you can sort of ballpark about 15% of the construction cost will go towards engineering and architecture fees. You might ask, how do I know what my construction cost is? So final construction costs will happen down the road once the project, once a builder like Max can look at the drawings and then determine the final cost. But early on, it's helpful for you to get a sense of the cost by creating a budget. So we put in here two methods of doing this, which we find are helpful for clients early on in a project. So one is what we call square footage calculation. And this will depend on where you live and how much construction generally costs in that area. It's not a super accurate way to do it, but it does give you a ballpark sense of the range of the cost for a project. For example, if you have a 2,000 square foot house, and if you live in, and you want to renovate the entire house, and you live in Washington, D.C., where it's $250 a square foot average to do a renovation, then you know that you're looking at about a $500,000 renovation. That's helpful in a ballpark way, right? We know if you pick a complete high-end set of appliances versus the low-end set of appliances, that your project will cost more, and likewise, your project will cost less. So that's why it's not super accurate, but it does give you a ballpark sense. The other way to develop a sense of construction costs would be labor and materials and discretionary selections. So what that would be would be to get an early cost from a builder to say, okay, what would the labor be to put an addition on my house or to redo my kitchen? And then you would put together a spreadsheet where you would go on, say you'd go on build.com and pick all the plumbing fixtures you want and put them in a cart and see how much they are. You could, you could say, okay, well, I know I want quartz material, and quartz material costs from my counters cost X amount of square foot. But basically, you put together a spreadsheet separate from the labor that then also gives you a sense of the cost. You also have to think about your rent or mortgage. So if you're going to be, larger projects, you won't be able to live in the space. So you will need some sort of rent that you'll have to pay. If you've bought one house while you still have another house, you'll have two mortgages to pay. So these need to be part of that budget consideration. Permit costs. Permit costs will vary. For a deck permit, it could be $125. For a whole house redo, it could be $5,000. So permit costs are something you can check with your local permit office and to get a sense of how the permit costs are calculated and to put that in your budget number. Landscape. If you're doing an addition, you'll need new landscape. If you're doing any serious exterior work, your existing landscape could be pretty well trampled by the time the project is done. So that's something that you would also want to think about, whether or not you need to engage a landscape architect or really just something you can do yourself or hire a landscaper to do. The other components of building, which are usually not typically included in like a base architectural set, would be if you want an alarm system. AV stands for audio visual, and then of course lighting controls. If these are things you want, there are companies that specifically do these things, and you can talk to them to get a sense of what those costs would be for your project. Lastly, we put on here contingencies. Because contingencies are important as you go through the project. Things will come up, especially if you're dealing with an existing house. We may find that there are lead pipes that need to be removed, or there's lead paint, or there's asbestos flooring somewhere in the house. It could be that you're planning a big basement addition and you hit some bedrock and the builder has to charge more. But it's good to have contingency funds, which usually are about 10 to 15% of the budget, that will that will kick in just in case something comes up. The next section we want to talk about is hiring an architect. So the first question to start out with is an architect required? And that can be a tricky question because it may depend on where you live and what type of work needs a permit. So the first thing you should do is think about the types of home improvements you're considering, and then reach out to your local permit office to see if an architect or if the permit is required. If you're doing a small project, like in DC, it's weird because if you move a dishwasher, you need to have a permit, but you don't necessarily need an architect to move a dishwasher. But small projects you can typically take to a homeowner center and a permit office, and you can discuss with them whether it's not something you will need a permit for. If you're doing an addition to your house, if you're raising a roof, if you're moving walls, you will definitely need a permit, and you will definitely need an architect who can put all that stuff together in a drawing package for you. So that first question, is an architect required? Obviously, the projects that I work on, an architect's usually required. So, but it's a really important question to ask, because it may be that that the scope is small enough where you wouldn't need to hire an architect. The second part of this is, what does an architect do? It's funny, we get asked this question a lot. I think people generally have a sense, but a lot of people say to me, "Oh, Josh, I want you to build me a house." And I'm like, well, I don't build. Fortunately, we have Max to do that. But we do the design. So one of the things that's really important here is that we meet with clients up front. We get a sense of your program requirements, back to those questions, the why and the what. The program requirements that you need, we will measure and draw your existing house. We will start to lay out designs and do designs with you. We'll look at elevations. We'll look at 3D renderings of what the different ideas will look like once they're extrapolated into 3D. We'll look at plans with you. We will go through that entire design process in order to figure out what the right house is for you. What's the right project for you? What size spaces do you really need? What types of spaces do you need? We will work with contractors for pricing. We will, of course, put together all the drawings that are required for those permits. Which the bigger the project, the more complicated the drawings can be. But we will do wall sections and call out materials and specify products with you, like siding and shingles and plumbing. And then we work with you and the builder during construction. We are your representative as a design professional in your contract with the builder. So we come out to the site, every week we have a meeting where we look at the progress done to date. We may see things that don't look like they're working with the way that the plans were drawn, and we will ask the builder, and the builder might say, "Oh, well, there was this existing condition, something was in the way, there's a conflict," and we work through those issues together. We also make sure that if the builder needs your plumbing selections or your tile selections by a certain date, that we help you with that, because inevitably there will be things that decisions that have to be made during the process. And homeowners always add things. It's very easy once the space is going up to decide, oh, I really want this space to be bigger, or I really want this entrance to be over here. And we'll work through those issues with you and issue sketches as we need to in order to keep the project moving forward. So the third part of this is basically selecting an architect that aligns with your vision. So now at this point, you have your what and your why. You have your inspiration. You understand what an architect does, but you need to figure out which architect is going to be right for you and for your project. So, we always suggest to clients that they interview at least three architects or design firms to get a sense of how they might operate differently, if they like their work, if they like the style of their work, if they have good ratings and good referrals. So if there are references, people you can talk to. You might find that your neighbors used an architect and they had a great experience, or likewise had a bad experience. So it's really good to reach out and to get feedback, and always ask for references from any architect that you interview. Different architects have different processes, and some will be more involved in construction and will come out and meet with you during construction and help explain things and mitigate issues. And some will sort of leave you more on your own during construction. And depending on your background, that might be okay. That might be something you like. The other thing to talk about here is what we call sort of the traditional method, or the design build method. And different architects will do this different ways. So a traditional method is where we, the architect, will develop preliminary drawings and detailed drawings with you. We'll send those out to bid to different builders. So we'll get multiple prices, so competitive pricing for a project. And then you will select one of those builders and start the project with them through construction. The design build method is a bit different. It's where those preliminary drawings and detailed drawings, that's what the phase where the cost is established. And that's because the design and the build team are the same. They're one entity. So they can work with you on those costs and they can dovetail that right into construction. So we typically see with design build that the timeline is shorter. And it's a bit sort of easier to sort of hold firm the cost of the project. What's a little more difficult is that the design and the build are the same entity. So while it's one-stop shopping, it also means that you as a homeowner are dealing with one entity, but there's not, in the traditional method, an architect who is really representing your interests at the table. So that does get a little bit murky from time to time, but they both have distinct advantages. So on to permits and engineering. We have sort of two categories here that are important, and what we call pre-permit approvals. So these are going to be approvals that are required before you file for your permit. So if you live in an historic district, they will typically need to review the project at a staff level or potentially at a hearing, where they'll want to see the outside, any exterior changes. Most will not care about interior changes, though if there's a trust on the property, that could be different in historic trusts. HOA, your homeowners association, we see homeowners associations that need to be notified and get approvals for paint colors or for changing a front door. So that's all wrapped up in that, and certainly larger additions as well. There are sometimes just neighborhood approvals and neighborhood groups that also have a say in your project. Like in DC, the ANC, area neighborhood commissions, need to be notified for larger projects, and those may also require a hearing. Lastly, in the section zoning, if you are asking for something that is not by right through zoning, zoning will often require that you go through a whole different process and a hearing before, once again, prior to that permit review. So once you get those pre-permit approvals, you can work into the permit review. That's where the architect will put together all the drawings that we've done thus far and submit it with your local building permit office. This is a more scrutinous review in terms of the detail, but it really is more of a sort of one stop. So you submit everything to the permit office. They will review architecture, life safety. So they'll look at smoke detectors and railing heights and safety features of the project. Engineering, so they'll review structural, civil, mechanical, electrical, plumbing drawings for the project, anything that's required by your jurisdiction. Public space, if there's anything happening with a public sidewalk that's part of your project, curb cut for a driveway. And then lastly, energy and environment. So this is to make sure that there's not too much runoff that comes out of the project, that the pipes are insulated correctly, that the mechanical is sized correctly for your project. And we've seen a lot more green reviews lately. But all those fold together in these permit reviews where they review, make comments, we get back to them with responses, and then eventually, happily and hopefully one day, secure the building permit. Once we secure the building permit, we move into construction. So I'm going to pass it off to Max to talk more about this section.
Alrighty, so selecting your contractor. So this process can happen in various stages of the pre-construction process, and the scale of the project will usually determine the time in which you make that selection. Typically, the larger the project, the earlier in the phase you're going to make that selection, generally because the contractor may need to help the architect with feasibility or value engineering, which we'll get into in a later slide. But before we make a selection on a contractor, we need to know or understand the types of contractors. So I have a couple categories. I could list 10 more, but with respect to residential contractors, most should fit under these four. And our first contractor is your home improvement contractor. And I like to say, for lack of a better term, two guys in a truck. That's not always the case, but they're typically companies that are suited for specific work or smaller jobs, like building a deck, a bathroom renovation, exterior work, painting. And most of the work is done in-house, meaning their employees are doing the work, and even the owner might be built on as well. Some advantages of these types of contractors are they're going to be more economical choice if your project is small or specific, because they'll be more efficient. They're doing those projects all the time, and their in-house workers are also doing the work. They're not subbing the work out. Which leads us to our next type of contractor, which would be our specialty contractor or a subcontractor. These contractors specialize in one specific trade. They're licensed professionals, so they'll have an education in the trade. You see that with your plumbers, your electricians, your HVAC companies, and they can be contracted directly by you. For instance, if your furnace breaks down, you don't need to hire a general contractor to repair it. You'll just, call an HVAC company. But when your project is of a larger scale and multiple specialty trades are involved, and the coordination of those trades are involved or required, that's when these specialty trades would be subcontracted by a general contractor. Which leads us to our next two broad categories, which is your general contractor / builder. And they're typically suited for all types of projects. And they have a combination of in-house employees. So they'll have a site superintendent, they'll have finished carpenters, painters, drywall guys, or guys who can do everything. And then for their specialty trades, they'll sub those out. So their plumber, their electrician, their structural framer, their HVAC. And that's really required because for larger projects, you'll need a master plumber to pull the plumbing permit. You'll need a master electrician to pull the electrical permit. So the advantage of using, a general contractor builder is they're going to have a broad range of experience in executing all types of projects, and they're best suited for larger scale projects. So kitchens, full interior renovations, pop-up additions, bump out additions, basement lowering, and they're going to be less expensive than a project management firm or full service remodeling firm. But some disadvantages would be that they're going to be less economical for smaller projects. If you're thinking about just renovating a bathroom, a general contractor might be too expensive for you. And there's going to be a lack of flexibility because they'll be scheduling subs to come in to do all the trades rather than your home improvement company that's going to be doing all the trades. And they're going to be more flexible. And then with respect to the comparison to a full service remodeling company, they're going to have less management structure than a project management firm. They'll have a site superintendent, but that's, or they may not. They may just have a lead carpenter, and the owner is kind of being the manager. And then our last category is, our project management firm, full service remodeling. These are our high-end remodeling companies. And they're similar to a general contractor, but they're more geared towards providing a client experience. You're not just paying for the execution, you're paying for less headaches, more organization, more structure. And, they're going to be similarly structured as far as they'll have in-house workers and subcontractors, but they're going to have that project manager, and he's going to be on site. And, one advantage is they're going to have more oversight than a general contractor or the smaller general contractors, as you will have that dedicated project manager. But they're going to be your most expensive option, and they could push your budget over the top. And they may still have inconsistencies in service or execution. They may have a whole team of project managers, and some project managers may be better than others. So summing this up, I have a couple tips. I would just say get at least 3 quotes. This will help put the pricing or your budget in perspective, and it'll help you be more informed. You may run into a case where 2 guys are really close and 1 guy's really low, and you want to be able to know that and ask, hey, like, are you missing something, or are these guys offering a different service? Or it might be the other way, where 1 guy's really high and he might be offering more service, or he may assume something that the others 2 didn't assume. So it's just good to have a reference point and have different quotes to base, your project off of. And then finally obtain, a reference from a similar project of yours. Just make sure that, the reference isn't going to, if you're doing a 2-story addition, make sure that that reference isn't, a reference who they built a deck for. You want to make sure that your contractor's qualified. And as a contractor, I'll tell you another thing is, we're going to always give you our best, our favorite clients and clients who are going to, rave about us. But it's also important to ask the proper questions that are important to you. So, you may talk to a reference who thinks I'm great, and time wasn't really an issue to them. There weren't time constraints. So they may not talk about if we were 2 months late, because we were doing their vacation home, and it didn't matter. But for you, you might be renting and paying the mortgage, and having a contractor that's on time may be really important. So that's just another thing, just to make sure that you're asking the references, important questions that are important to you and specifically your project. That leads us to our next slide. Types of contracts. So there are 3 main payment structures. There's time and material, cost plus, and lump sum. Time and material are very similar, or time and material and cost plus are very similar. The only difference between the 2 is cost plus is, the contractor will add their overhead and profit and any other like administrative things. So they may charge you for gas, they may charge you for stationery or paperwork. And this can be very tedious. A lot of accounting would be involved, and you're generally at a higher risk when you take on a payment structure like this. The only advantage for these types of payment structure is when the scope isn't known or truly understood. Like if you have a leak in your roof, we may not know what the problem is, so we may not be able to give you an exact price or a fixed price, because there's just so many unknowns, and we're going to have to do do different things and testing to figure out what the problem is and then what the solution is. But our lump sum is really the most common type of payment structure that you'll run into, and that's what Josh and I are accustomed to, and that's what we use for larger scale projects, and that's going to be a fixed price contract, and that will be used when we have a clear scope and a clear finalized set of drawings, and it will also be well, no, I just said that, so sorry. So anyway, leading to the scope, the other important documents, with a lump sum contract, you're going to want to have a clear scope of work, and the scope of work serves as a narrative to the plans and its clarifier, and that'll be provided by the contractor. The more detailed the scope of work, the less at risk you are for running into change orders or disputes. You may also be accompanied by a specification outline, And the architect is going to also, that'll be something the architect could or would provide to you. Josh has an outline that he always sends to us, and just so we know what type of materials to expect. And then we take that outline, we take the plans, and then we reference both of those in our scope of work. So just tips, the more scope, the better. The more clarification you have, again, it's really critical to just keep yourself from running into unexpected work orders or unexpected costs, or, you know, I thought you assumed this, but you didn't. And then try to use the lump sum contract for larger projects. And then I didn't touch on this, but the AIA contract is an industry standard contract. You can find it online, but this contract I would recommend using. Most of the verbiage in there is it protects the protects the homeowner and the architect. And then contractors may have their own contracts. We have our own, but we use both. And you just want to read through that contract and make sure that you're protected as well. And then that leads us to our final slide. So stages of the construction process. So we'll have our pre-construction stage, and that's going to be where you're working with Josh again, and you could be working with myself in feasibility. You know, you may not know if your house is even capable of putting an additional story, or you may need to, you know, there may be extra work required to figure out if it, you know, how much will that cost, and that will tie into the budgeting. So, you know, architects aren't perfect, and your original design may not always align with your budget, and that's when the architect and contractor butt their heads together and work on getting the most value out of your project by reducing scope. And we call this value engineering. So the goal is really to, you know, with a budget in mind, hey, what are some things that we can take out that won't take away from the integrity of the project? And that's kind of a three-way, you know, communication with the homeowner, the architect, and the contractor if they're selected, or it might be with all three contractors. And then contractor selection, you know, kind of once you figure out the budget and you finalize the scope, then you'll make your selection. And then the last is fixtures and fitting selections. You know, you're going to want to start working on that as early as possible. You know, and the reason why is you want to make sure that the contractor has what he needs when he needs it. And a lot of these different types of fixtures and finishes are critical path. So we can't do something, we can't proceed further into the project until those products are on site. And that would be your appliances, your cabinets, your plumbing fixtures, electrical fixtures, tiles. There's this whole sequencing to the construction phase, and you know, the selections are a large part of that sequencing. So, and a lot of these selections can also be selected throughout the construction phase, but just as a rule of thumb, try to get as much as you can selected at, you know, before it's too late, or before, you know, you get overwhelmed. And then construction. So just talk briefly on this. Commencement, just set your expectations. This can be an emotional time, for a lack of a better term or example. A stranger is going to be entering your home and tearing it down. So you just want to be prepared for that. And there may be time constraints. You know, you're renting or you're holding 2 leases, so it's a stressful time. And then just make sure that, you know, all your delicate and expensive items are removed from the house, and make sure your contractors using proper protection techniques, making sure they're covering all the floors, creating dust barriers where in areas that aren't affected by construction. Then we have the Ruffin Trades. I have a picture there right next to it. You know, that's a project that's just completed Ruffins and we closed in. But your Ruffin Trades are going to be your MEPs, your mechanical, your electrical, your plumbing. And these are critical phases of construction because this is kind of the last time you can decide where you want something located until it's going to be really expensive. Because once we put drywall in, it's going to be very costly to move things around. And then last is your finishing trades. That's just going to be your drywall, your flooring, your finished carpentry, your painting, floor staining. So finally, substantial completion. So the definition, this is a construction term. Substantial completion is the stage in the progress of the work when the work or design portion thereof is significantly complete in accordance with the contract documents that the owner can occupy or utilize the work for its intended use. What does that mean? That means the project's pretty much complete minus a few little small details. And that is where we'll have a substantial completion meeting. And we'll do a walkthrough with the architect if he's involved and the homeowner. And we'll have a punch list. And a punch list is just a document that, you know, itemizes all of the outstanding work items that need to be completed. And those are usually small things like if a tile's cracked and it needs to be replaced, or if there's a scuff on the wall, or, you know, if there's a missing door hardware that needs to be installed. We'll compile this list and then we'll assign a value to it. And that will be your final holdback value. And we'll multiply that value by industry standards is 1.5 or 2. So if it's $1,000 worth of holdback, you multiply it by 2, it's 2,000. That gives the incentive of the contractor to get the work done and not to just leave and go on to the next project. So the last thing is warranty. Just when you're looking at your contract, make sure the contractor has clearly defined what his warranty is. Industry standards 1 year. With that, I will just, tips of the trade, last thing, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit. So just last things, get your selections in as soon as possible. It'll just make for a cleaner and more straightforward project. And it'll reduce the time, the possibility of delays. Set proper expectations. Mistakes are going to be made. Things may get delayed. You may run into the unexpected work orders. It's going to happen. So just mentally prepare yourself for it. And that goes with just don't get caught up in the day-to-day activities. You may see something that's wrong, but the general contractor already knows and he's working on to fix it. And you may be stressed out over something that's, you know, that's already being in the works of being fixed. So with that, now we can kind of open up our Q&A.
It's probably a good place to end it. Don't get too stressed out about day to day. So yeah, we have a bunch of good questions coming in. So the first one, I think this was when Josh was talking about kind of money. If this person wants to save renovation funds before beginning the process, is there a ballpark that you would suggest saving? I assume it depends on the project, or are there guidelines for determining how much to save depending on the project?
I can take this one, Josh. So typically there's 2 ways of going. You can engage with an architect, or you can engage with the contractor. And if you have a general idea of what your scope is, you can often get a ballpark estimate from the contractor. Or, you know, Josh may be able to give you a cost per square foot generally for different types of projects. And you can add on to that, Josh, if you like.
No, yeah, no, I basically was going to say that. I mean, it's important to, I mean, yes, it's important to save the money, but also important to have a sense of how much the project will cost, because obviously a deck will cost a lot less than a whole house renovation. The other thing that we didn't really talk a lot about is just financing a project. And there are a lot of banks now who give construction loans. There's HELOCs, there's home improvement loans, home equity loans. So there's lots of different loan options too, in addition to just saving money.
Great, thank you. So the next couple questions relate to ADA, accessibility, aging in place. So Amber says, we're looking to make some renovations to our home to increase ADA compliance and accessibility, ramp, replacing door hardware, etc. What's the best way to find architects and/or contractors who are experienced in ADA accessibility modifications for single family homes? They live in Maryland. And then Eileen says, kind of, can you address universal design for those hoping to age in place? So,
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we typically do a lot for folks who want to age in place. That's not necessarily full ADA, like full ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's going to be required more in commercial applications. So, you know, I'll let Max maybe talk a little bit more about the contractor side of it, but in terms of the design, we find that most people who just want their house to be, you know, more accessible for aging in place will install grab bars and showers. We'll have showers with like low curbs, so they're sort of easy to step into, wider doors, but lots of grab bars in the bathroom. Also, we just think about the size of the room. Like if you did need a wheelchair, you know, if you're making it full ADA compliant, you would need a 5-foot turning radius in the middle of the bathroom. It's huge for a residential bathroom. So most houses can't accommodate that unless it's a new house or unless it's an apartment building or something. But there are ways to just make it more accessible. We've done a lot of like first floor primary bedroom suites, you know, with a full bathroom. We've also done a lot of interior residential elevators. So we've had a few projects where clients have wanted us to add elevators so they can still access all the floors. But we see full ADA as more of a commercial side of things. Having said that, I'm sure that, you know, like if you have an existing structure, an existing dwelling, that, you know, any architect could, you know, any architect who does residential, or maybe you want one who does residential and commercial, so they have a really good sense of the ADA, can work with you and sort of figuring out what that design is. Max, I don't know in terms of the best contractors to do that work, because typically residential contractors aren't into full ADA. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, like Josh said, a lot of times we won't be building, you know, certified ADA compliance, you know, scope items, but, you know, we can put in ramps. We're doing a lot more, you know, a full bathroom master suite on the first floor. You know, we're doing curbless showers, you know, but Josh pretty much covered everything that I would say anyway. So I guess we can move on to the next question.
I'm pretty sure my bathroom here at my apartment is probably only 5 feet from wall to wall. So that I would be able to do that. So the next question is from Carla. It's kind of specific, Carla Elaine Johnson. It's kind of specific, but she is at the start of a landscaping project. One company has fallen through. The current company is doing just a design, and she needs to find a different company for installation. Can you use an AIA contract for landscaping? If not, what would you recommend? They're working on a labyrinth, the current team. They also have given several companies for garden bed installation and plants. One has never responded. She has 3 others. And then there's 2 follow-up questions, which is the process the same? I hope you're getting all this. Is the process the same number one. And number two, is the recommendation of another company better than just asking clients for work done after the design is given? Did you get all that?
Oh yeah, that's a
Yeah.
lot. Um, I mean, a couple things that stand out to me. I don't know if the AI has a specific landscape contract. And if they do, it would probably be with a landscape architect and not necessarily a landscape contractor. But it's probably worth asking the question. Um, if the AI has that. I don't know offhand. I actually have not seen many of the landscape contracts, or any in my years. So we find that personal references for builders and architects, and for landscape architects and landscapers, are definitely the way to go. Like if you can actually physically talk to someone who has a similar project, like Max was saying, and who had a good experience or a great experience, like that's huge, especially if it's someone that you find who is not someone that maybe the design professional gives you, like if it's a friend or a relative or a neighbor. um, I think there was another question in there, and I may have missed that one.
Um,
Is the process the same? Yeah, maybe Max can wade through.
so again, so there is, if you've hired a landscape architect, it's similar. The process is similar in the fact that other landscaping companies are probably bidding on it. And you said there's some guys who might not have responded yet. There's someone who's very engaged, and that just might be the difference between a company that's really busy, or a company that has, more structure, where they have a team that can submit on time and, answer your questions, versus just more of a smaller company, or, sole proprietorship, where he's kind of doing everything. But as far as the AIA, I think it could work. One thing that I didn't mention about payment structure is using a milestone-based payment structure, and I think that's really important. And I did fail to mention that. And that's just making sure that the way you're paying the contractor, it is based off of milestones. So tangible things that have been completed. So say you have $100,000, there might be 4 or 5 different draws split in, various ways. And, it may be when the tile's installed, or when the kitchen cabinets are installed. Just make sure that you understand how the payment works. And I think there was one more question, follow-up question.
I'm not sure. There was AIA, and then is the process the same? And well, Carla is clarifying. She hired a company after 2 other companies just did not even return phone calls. Wanted someone to do the backyard and front yard. Current company is mom and pop. Carla, how about we will keep the speakers on and you guys could have a full conversation. Let me just get to Calandra's question really quickly. So unless this is the last call for questions, if anyone has any more, put them in the chat. Carla will keep you on, and we can chat with the speakers.
It's Carla and Lane. I've got to go to a meeting at 2.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is very helpful. I wanted a labyrinth in my backyard. Finding someone to do that is very difficult. I'm in Minnesota. We also have weather issues. My biggest thing is, when I thought they were going to do the whole thing, backyard plus labyrinth. Instead, they're like, oh, we can do the design, we can do that installation, but we don't do garden beds. Here are 3 companies. One of them was the same company I've been trying to call for 3 months that never responded. And so I was wondering, and I think what you're saying is, if I can find someone else who's actually had work done by these 3 companies, much better than taking just the word of the company that's doing the design to actually pick one. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. A personal reference goes much further.
Then I'll do that. It's more work on my end. The only thing I've had with reconstruction was a kitchen. I did it for my mom about 5 years ago, and it was one of those companies that did everything. It was $35,000, but it was so worth it. It was done in 2 weeks, no problems, and it was worth the extra money. So I'm willing to pay if they could do it without any hassle. But this is outside, not inside. So that's why I was asking. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. Sounds like she got her answer. Awesome. So Calandra had a question. This is about kind of budget again, and she uses the word ballpark again. It was mentioned earlier that the going rate in DC is $250 per square foot, but that seems like it might be for a complete renovation or new build. Where are some good places to get a ballpark idea of reasonable estimates to set your budget for a smaller renovation, like an unfinished basement, for example?
So I think Max and I should both answer this, and you can sort of hear because the answer might be slightly different, but our experience is once again in that early ballpark phase. 250 is kind of, I think it would be a safe number for your basement. You might, if it comes in a little less, that's great, but the reality is that to renovate space and to build new space, the cost is not terribly different, and that's annoying. But in an existing house, you're working with existing walls that could be bowed and existing floor slopes, and you're tying into something that's existing. So it does tend to not be drastically different than than what you were saying, like if it's a total new build or a complete renovation. We also find that the smaller the project, the more expensive that square footage number would be. So if you said to me like, oh, I want to redo my kitchen, you might be $450 a square foot, because the kitchen's a super expensive room. And once again, these are DC prices, but and then the only other thing to mention about that is sometimes with like a small bathroom, it's almost safer to just talk to a builder and say like, okay, if it's just a bathroom, how much will it be? Or maybe if your basement exists, bring a builder over, get them to walk through the basement space with you and say, okay, this is what I want to do. Let's assume finishes are going to be mid-level. Help me out with the budget, because that might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I tend to just shy away from price per square footages, mainly because there are different parts of the project that could inflate that aren't really represented. So if, for instance, if your basement if you need a new HVAC system in your basement, that would drive the price per square foot up if we were just keeping it. So you really need to, the best way to go about it is really to engage with a few contractors, invite them to, once everyone's vaccinated, invite them to do a site visit and, show them what type of, what work you want done. And then they can draft up, they could give you, they may say, hey, like I can give you a ballpark, or, hey, I'll, write you a full estimate. And that's really, so many projects are so unique in the scope that, price per square foot is just, it's really difficult to predict correctly.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for the answer. And I will answer Jerry's question. Jerry is asking if there is a multi-state TERP network to reach out for references for contractors and trades, like an Angie's List for TERPs. So we are working on like a TERP business network, basically. We have been compiling that for the last year to support our TERP businesses. So we have a long list that we are working on sharing with all TERPs. But in the meantime, if you have a LinkedIn account, there are ways to kind of go on and see who alumni are within the University of Maryland and what they do. And you can kind of go from there and put in keywords to say contractor and things like that. So Jerry, I'll follow up with you via email and give you some notes. I also used to travel to St. Pete when I was allowed to travel for work. So St. Pete Beach. But Anyway, thank you so much, you guys. That kind of wraps things up. The slides will be available. I'm recording the actual recording, so I'll put that on YouTube. I will include Josh and Max's contact information in follow-up messages. We've got a couple more Home 101 events this week. I think one tomorrow and then one on Monday about mental health and gardening, which we all need. So feel free to sign up for those. Any last words from our speakers?
No, just thanks everybody for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This has been great. Really, really fun to do.
Yes, I learned a lot eventually when I own and I renovate. It's gonna be great. But thank you guys so much. And thanks everyone for coming. I'll just end by saying go Terps. Have a good day.
All right, go Terps.
Take care.
Right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.